All right, we'll get Georgia and Athens on Saturday. They've got an explosive football team that's been very dominant this year. I think you start, obviously, offensively with the running back position and Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and DeAndre Swift. And they've got a stable of backs that are all explosive guys that have they've run the ball extremely well this year. I think the one thing you look at their offensive football team where they've improved from year one to year two is on their offensive line. I think they're blocking extremely well up front and getting a hat on a hat. They don't give up many negative plays and or sacks. So it's a football team that's been very efficient offensively. Jake Fromm's done an outstanding job at the quarterback position of taking care of the football and managing their offense. He shows arm talent. He's been accurate with the football when they've asked him to throw the football. You look at the Missouri game, I think there's 4 or 5 explosive plays on third down where he's creating explosives down the field against tight coverage. Really good playmakers on the perimeter, Terry Godwin and Ridley and Javon Wims, a guy we recruited here, obviously. Miko Hardeman, who's done a really very nice job in their return game. But a guy that's they're getting the ball in his hands in a really good stable of tight ends with Nada and Warner and Blazevich and those guys. Defensively, again, a veteran group. Juniors and seniors across the board, and they're too deep. Guys that been watching for a long time. Dominic Sanders is a guy that's probably going to break their interceptions record from Tucker High School there in Atlanta, but a really good football player. Aaron Davis plays everything for him. J.R. Reed's been a good addition for him this year. That's done a nice job for him. Malcolm Parrish has been a corner that started for him for a long time, and Tyreek McGee's a guy that's come along, played well for him. Roquan Smith probably leads their defense, a guy that plays really fast and physical. I think there'll be 2 really good linebacking cores on display on Saturday. 2 outstanding cores, our guys and theirs. The guys that play the game the way it's supposed to be played. Dalvin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter up front. Trenton Thompson and John Atkins and the guys inside there. Those guys have all played a bunch of football, and guys we got a lot of respect for. They got really good team speed. So obviously their kicking game has been really good, and Miko's done a nice job returning kicks for them. But injury-wise for us, the offensive linemen are fine. Malik's the one that I would say is the furthest away from being totally healthy. Chad Terrell ran today and looked good. We'll evaluate him again tomorrow. But other than that, we should be good to go. And I'll open up for any questions.
Will, looking at Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm, what's the biggest difference between the two, and what is Fromm doing that's really made him successful?
Well, I think as much as anything, I would look at Jake Bentley from year 1 to year 2. And how I would compare that, David, is everyone else around Jake Fromm has been in the offense now for 2 years. So he's not directing traffic and telling the running back where to go and telling the offensive line where to go and tell the tight end where to go and get the receiver on the other side, which if you remember watching Jake Bentley last year, there's a lot of that happened because they're in the first year of their scheme and system. So in all fairness to Jacob Eason, I mean, that he was managing that last year along with being a freshman quarterback in our league, which is extremely difficult to do. Jake's walked into a situation and he's done a fantastic job, but he's not trying to tell the running back where to line up. He's not having to do a lot of those things that people don't really see happening as the plays, evolve in there. So to me, that's the biggest difference. He's had a lot of that off his plate that Jacob probably had to deal with a bunch of that last year.
Well, what's the key for the defense, your defense, on putting the brakes on those Georgia running backs, making sure they just don't have a crazy game?
Well, I think as much as anything, the one you see a lot of the bounce out runs, they get the ball in the perimeter extremely well. They all have top end speed and can finish on the runs. You got to limit the explosive runs. Right now they're over 80 with 10-yard plus runs, I believe. It might be more than that now, but I know in tracking that through the year, they've been a team that's been very explosive in the running game, and you've got to limit the explosive runs.
Let's go to the back, Mark.
Coach, with the season that Georgia's having, how do you keep your players from looking at that number 2 ranking, looking at all these blowouts the Bulldogs have put together, and just kind of focusing on what they've got to do to go to Athens and be successful?
Well, each week for us is all the same. Every week's a season as far as how we approach things, and certainly we have respect for all of our opponents and got respect for Georgia. But at the end of the day, it comes back to our preparation, how we prepare. We had a very good start today. Really pleased with the attitude, the effort, and the enthusiasm we had on the field today. And I know our guys will go compete. We plan on showing up.
How helpful is it getting Sherrod back when you're facing this kind of power rushing attack?
Well, it's really important to have a hard edge set. I talked about it earlier as far as some of their explosive runs are a lot of bounce out runs and not holding gaps on the outside and keeping the ball hemmed up inside. And certainly having a bigger body on the edge to be able to set the edge of the defense is important.
Coach, is there a set number in terms of explosive plays you want your offense to have? And for Jake, is it more about him going out there and making those explosive plays, or kind of being efficient with the ball and not turning it over and completing a lot of passes?
We'd love to have 8 explosives, whether it's in the run or pass game, a game. And then if you're able to build on top of that, certainly changing the momentum of the game is extremely important. And that's how you change field position, and momentum is the explosive plays you're able to create.
It seemed like you guys kind of honed into a comfort zone with your offense. And you talked about this a little bit Saturday, but you guys are figuring out what you do well. How important is that going into this week, especially against that Georgia defense?
Well, again, they're a difficult front to block. I mean, they do a good job of getting off blocks and swarming the football. So, there's going to be some tough sledding in the run game at times, but we got to stay with the run game and we got to stay balanced. At the end of the day, we can't get into a one-dimensional game against these guys. We've got to stay balanced in the run game and have the ability to be effective running the football.
Will, did you and Kirby overlap as players at Georgia?
I was a senior when he was a freshman.
What do you remember about him as a player?
He was an outstanding player. He was very active, a guy that, I think he was one of the interceptions leader in Georgia history. But a guy that would return kicks for him. He could run extremely well and was an outstanding player.
Did you ever coach him up any?
No, I tried to. He didn't listen.
Will,
I coached him up in basketball a lot. He never could beat us. Go ahead.
Well, you've been in a number of these games, these big, impactful games that matter in a bigger picture. A lot of your guys haven't. Is there anything that you as coaches can do to kind of get them through this, get them to understand what's at stake and not worry about nerves and distractions, things like that?
I think as much as anything, it's just kind of the approach of our program every day and treating every game the same as far as how we approach it. There's no any bigger game than another one. Our guys understand this is a big game. I don't need to tell them that. They get that part of it. So I just think that the methodical approach of how we go about, we don't treat anything differently. Our meetings aren't any longer. There's no more emphasis on what we're trying to do. It's obviously, we respect our opponent, and we show them the tendencies of our opponent, the things we feel like we need to do to win the game, and that's how we approach it. And certainly I think that's where you rely a little bit more on your older players to steer the young guys in the right direction as far as their focus is concerned. And certainly we've got a veteran staff and understands if the focus isn't there, and that certainly we try and get that back in line.
Hey, Coach, obviously the news coming
You
out
got a better sweater on. Go ahead.
What's that? I do. Obviously the news coming out on Sunday about Jim McElwain. Having been through that a couple years ago, what advice can you give to him and his family about going through this? And then were you surprised that Florida made a coaching change this quickly?
Again, I don't really want to comment on something I don't know a lot about, so I'll refrain from anything that I think, because it doesn't matter. But, I don't have any advice for Jim. He doesn't need any advice. It's a tough situation. The sun's going to come up, and you got to press forward in your career and figure out what you want to do. And, and that's what I'm sure what he'll do. But Jim's a good man, number one. He's a good football coach, and he's going to be fine. And you don't just hurt for Jim. You hurt for that staff. You hurt for that support staff. There's a bunch of those folks going to be out of job and out of work here. So that's a tough part of our profession, but it's a reality of our profession as well.
Coach, I know you've been back there. I mean, obviously the school that you played for, the school that, got your degree and all that. I mean, do you kind of become numb over time in the sense of the sentimental part of it all? And if that is the case, when does that happen along the coaching line?
It happens pretty quick. I was a GA at Auburn in 1995, and we went and played Georgia. So it happens quickly. At the end of the day, you're loyal to the people writing your checks, and obviously I had a wonderful experience at Georgia. And it's it's interesting in the recruiting process, because I have recruits and parents say, you're so positive about the other schools. And I am, because I had a great experience at LSU, I had a great experience at Auburn, I had a great experience at Florida. And it's all about, your individual choice and what you think fits you best. And at the end of the day, I think we've got a great fit for all recruits here at the University of South Carolina. But again, like I said Sunday night, right now, Dominic Sanders is a lot better than Will Muschamp, and he's better than Kirby Smart too. They're playing with better players than me and Kirby right now, and you give them credit.
Just from kind of catching Georgia games here and there, it seems like offensively they're doing less two-back stuff, more three-receiver sets. Have you kind of seen that, and what does it sort of say about what they've got that they can generate the power rushing they have from 11 personnel?
Well, I think that they adjust week to week, and obviously they have some staples within their system and what they do. And certainly in 11 personnel, that's one of their staple, formations and or personnel groupings, I should say. And they still have the base runs off of that they carry week to week. Which at the end of the day, you may give a different window dressing to it, but your run game is going to remain the same because that's what your players get used to doing and your backs get used to seeing. They get used to hitting the hole, whether it's 3 down or 4 down or whatever the case may be. But then each week, I think Jim does a really nice job of creating another personnel grouping or another formation or set that you've got to be able to adjust to in the game. And that's going to be critical for us defensively.
Coach, what worked so well on Saturday versus Vandy in the run game, and what can you echo from last Saturday to this Saturday that could work very well?
Well, whatever we've worked well, they've worked on all week, so I don't know if it's going to work well. So we've got to find some things that we feel like going into the game that we feel like we can get a good start in the run game. I think that in the last 3 ball games, we've done a really good job offensively of adjusting throughout the game and running the ball extremely well in the second half, although I felt like in the Vanderbilt game we did a pretty good job the entire game. But we did a nice job getting the ball in the perimeter as much as anything, and they were doing a lot of games inside to change up some things in the inside zone, and we got the ball in the perimeter. So those are some things that worked for us last week. But again, people have your film, they see what you're doing, they see what you have success with, and they're going to structure themselves to make sure you don't have success doing those things.
At some point today or yesterday, Javon Kinlaw put a quote on Twitter that said, "Brush your teeth physical this week." Is he quoting you?
I can't tell you that. Everything you got to have a physical mindset, in this ball game, and you got to understand that part of it. And everything you do, you be physical. So I appreciate him listening well.
Is there a way to measure that physicality over the course of the week during practice, or is that something you just see with your eyes?
Well, I think as much as anything, just understanding to me, it's a mentality of understanding the edge you got to have going into a game like this. And we practice physical every Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to get after it and have our run periods and things that we do that we feel like is going to help us, give us an edge on game day. You get this point of the season too, you've also got to be smart about being fresh, fast, and physical on game day. And so we felt like we had a good physical practice today, and I feel like we'll have good fresh legs on Saturday.
Did you guys do anything fun around the facility for Halloween?
No. What are you dressed up as?
Underpaid reporter, like
It's red zone and 3rd down day. It's not Halloween. It's Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't know how I can follow that one, but Will, playing a game like this on national television against a program like Georgia that's undefeated, ranked number 2, what kind of boost does that give your recruiting effort being involved in a game like this?
Well, I don't think any exposure is going to be positive for you. As far as it's the right kind of exposure you want, as far as those things are concerned. And I think that from a recruiting standpoint, the number one thing in year 2 is people see progress from where we were 3 years ago, and that's what they need to be able to see is positive progress in our program. They see the operations facility, they see the support, they see the game day atmosphere, they see Columbia, they see all of the positive things that are happening here because the arrow certainly is pointed up right now, and we've got to continue to build on that momentum.
Any other questions for Coach? Coach, just talk about the way your defense is playing. It seems like this is going to be a matchup of, 2 very good defenses. I know Chris Lamont said, it's an opportunity for, his team to show how really good they are on the stage. I guess, what are you seeing from this defense and how they'll be able to perform, not only on the stage, but on the road as well?
Well, there's no question this will be our toughest task as far as the type of offense we're facing. the physicality that Georgia plays with, the elite backs that they have, and the perimeter guys and skill kids that they have. So there's no doubt this will be our toughest test of the year. I know our guys are prepared well today, and we need to continue to prepare well through the week and play well on Saturday. And you got to have your preparation needs to carry over to game day.
Coach, the first playoff rankings are coming out tonight. From what you've seen from Georgia, obviously before you guys play them, is Georgia a top 4 team if you were on the committee? And what do you think overall about the playoff system?
I hadn't spent any time thinking about the playoff system. I'm worried about Georgia and South Carolina right now, and I haven't spent any time worrying about any of that.
Anything else for Coach?
Trick or treating today?